I didn't know much about Alaska when I first saw the listing for an Airbnb cabin nestled in the wilderness. The photos were stunning, secluded, off the grid, with views of snow-capped mountains stretching endlessly. The idea of an escape from the chaos of life in the lower 48 sounded perfect. The description promised an authentic Alaskan experience, and who could resist the call of the wild? I booked it without hesitation, not realizing that I was stepping into something much darker than I could have ever imagined. The host, a man named Aaron Miller, seemed friendly enough in his messages. He warned me that the road leading to the cabin could be treacherous during the winter months, especially as the days got shorter. "You'll need a reliable vehicle and experience driving in snow," he said. I thought he was just being cautious. Alaska was known for its rough terrain, after all. I was wrong. When I arrived, the sky was already dimming, and the air had that sharp bite to it. The cabin stood in isolation, a small wooden structure with a metal roof, barely visible through the trees. It looked almost abandoned, like something out of a horror movie. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. Aaron wasn't there to greet me as promised, but he had left a note on the door with the key. It was written in a rushed scrawl, "Make sure to lock up at night. The wildlife here is curious." I rolled my eyes, assuming he meant bears or moose. He had mentioned that before in his messages. I had my doubts, but I pushed the thought aside and made my way inside. The cabin was small, cozy even. There was a wood-burning stove, a couple of mismatched chairs, and an old, creaky bed. But it was the windows that caught my attention. They were large, but the forest outside was too dark to see anything clearly. As I unpacked, I heard something outside. A crack, followed by a distant, eerie howl that seemed to carry for miles. Wolves, I thought, or maybe a coyote. But the sound felt too deliberate, too unnatural. I decided to call it a night early, hoping a good rest would settle my nerves. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the walls, had me on edge. Just as I began to drift off, there was a knock on the door. I jumped up, heart racing. Who could it be? Aaron? No, I thought. He had said he'd be too far to visit tonight. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I opened the door slowly, and there, standing in the dark, was a man I didn't recognize. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but I could make out the faint outline of his eyes. "Lost your way?" he asked, his voice gravelly, almost like he had something stuck in his throat. I froze, not sure how to respond. He didn't look like a tourist, and his presence unsettled me. "I'm fine," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Without another word, he nodded and turned, disappearing into the trees as quickly as he'd appeared. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Something about that man, something felt wrong. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't alone here. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a strange encounter, nothing to worry about. Maybe he was a local looking for someone else. The night was long, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I stepped outside to survey the land, that feeling of being watched crept over me again. The forest was eerily quiet. Not a bird, not a rustle in the trees. It felt wrong. I tried to push it aside, telling myself that Alaska was just different, wild, untamed. But the silence made my skin crawl. I decided to head to the nearest town, about an hour's drive south. I needed to pick up a few things, and I figured some human interaction might calm my nerves. When I arrived, the place was small, no more than a couple of buildings and a gas station. I grabbed a coffee from the only shop in town and chatted with the barista, a woman named Emily. "You're staying at that cabin, huh?" she asked with a knowing look, raising an eyebrow. "Heard some weird stuff happens out there." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, I know. But I'm sure it's just some stories. People love to talk about the wilderness, right?" Emily didn't smile. Just, be careful. Some things in these parts, they don't leave you alone. Her words lingered in my mind as I drove back to the cabin. I couldn't shake the unease settling deep in my gut. Was it the strange man from last night? Or was it something else? The cabin, now bathed in the fading light of the afternoon, looked even more desolate. I parked the truck and walked up to the door, but before I could open it, I heard a noise from the woods. A low, dragging sound, as if something heavy was moving through the underbrush. I stood frozen, heart pounding. And then, through the trees, I saw him. The man from last night. His back was to me, but this time, I noticed something else, a long, dark shape wrapped around his shoulders. It looked like fur. My breath hitched. I called out to him. "Hey, are you lost?" He didn't respond. Instead, he began to turn, and I froze. His face was no longer obscured by the hood. His eyes were sunken, too dark, and his skin was unnaturally pale. His lips were cracked, almost blackened. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was twisted. Without a word, he took a step toward me, and that's when I saw it. Clutched tightly in his hands was a large, jagged knife, the kind that looked like it belonged to a hunter. My instincts kicked in. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I spun around and ran toward the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it in a panic, my heart racing in my chest. I peered through the window, my hands trembling as I looked into the woods. Nothing. The man was gone. I didn't stay inside for long. I needed to figure out what was going on. The thought of waiting until morning, until I could leave, felt wrong. I was in a place where the wilderness could swallow you whole, and that man, he didn't seem like someone who belonged here. I grabbed my keys, checking the truck one more time, but as I did, I noticed something strange in the snow near the driveway. Tracks large, heavy footprints, too large to be human. They led away from the cabin, into the trees. I had no choice. I had to follow. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I followed the strange tracks. My breath came out in clouds, freezing in the air before disappearing. I could feel the weight of the wilderness around me, silent, oppressive, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The path was winding and uneven, the prints leading deeper into the trees, where the light from the fading sun couldn't reach. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, not just from the cold, but from the creeping fear settling over me. The tracks weren't human. They were too large, too deep, almost like someone, had been dragging something heavy behind them. The further I went, the more unsettling the trail became. There were signs that something had been moving quickly, too quickly for comfort, and there were marks in the snow like scratches, deep gouges that looked like claws had slashed at the ground. My mind raced. I couldn't figure out what could make these kinds of marks. I thought of bears or wolves, but these tracks, they didn't belong to any animal I knew. Something darker, something far worse, seemed to be stalking these woods. I kept moving, determined to find out what the hell was going on. I glanced back at the cabin, still visible in the distance, a small speck of warmth in the vast, cold wilderness, but then I heard it. A crack, a sharp noise from behind me. My head snapped around, but all I could see was the endless line of trees and snow, stretching out into the twilight. Nothing. I quickened my pace, my boots scraping against the ice, and suddenly, I stopped dead in my tracks. The tracks I had been following, they ended. They disappeared. Just like that. I stood there, blinking in disbelief. There were no more prints in the snow. No broken branches. Just a strange, empty patch of forest. My heart thudded in my chest as I glanced around, but I saw no movement. No shadow slipping between the trees. I was about to turn around, when something caught my eye. There, just beyond the trees, something that didn't belong. A figure. At first, I thought it was just another tree or a shadow, but no. It was a person, or at least, it looked like one. But the way it stood, unnaturally still. Too still. Its head tilted at an odd angle, as if it were trying to look at me from the corner of its eyes. My throat went dry. It didn't move, not even a twitch. For a moment, I thought about running back to the cabin, but something made me take a step forward. I wasn't sure what drove me to do it. Maybe some part of me still thought I could rationalize it, maybe I thought it was just a trick of the light. I took another step, and that's when it moved. Slowly. Jerking. Like a puppet on broken strings. It took one step, then another, each movement dragging itself closer to me. Its face, if you could call it a face, was half covered with something dark, like dirt or ash, and its eyes were wide, unblinking, just dark pits. The thing's skin was stretched too thin, like it had been pulled too tight. I didn't wait to see more. The primal instinct to survive kicked in, and I turned and ran, faster than I ever thought possible. My breath burned in my chest, but I couldn't slow down. Not with that thing behind me. I heard it following, dragging its feet over the snow, its steps in rhythm with mine, getting closer, closer. I reached the cabin in what felt like a lifetime, my hands fumbling for the door handle, my body shaking so violently that I nearly fell over. I managed to get inside and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaky hands. My heart raced in my ears as I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. But then I froze. The door wasn't the only thing that had been knocked. There was something, or someone, scratching at the walls. Low, guttural sounds, like claws raking against wood. The scraping moved to the windows next, a slow, deliberate crawl that sent a wave of panic through me. The thing was still out there. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe too loud. I could feel it watching me through the walls, through the windows. Waiting for me to make a mistake. I pulled the curtains aside just enough to see outside, but all I could see was the blackened forest. The wind had picked up, howling around the cabin like a living thing. The world outside seemed to vanish into a sea of white, the trees bending under the weight of the snow, the darkness creeping in. And then, I saw it. The man. The one from the night before. His eyes, dark and lifeless, staring right at me. He was standing in the woods, just beyond the trees. No longer moving. Just watching. I shut the curtains and backed away, the icy grip of fear tightening in my chest. Something was wrong with this place. And I had no idea what it wanted from me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The house felt alive, and every creak of the wood, every gust of wind rattling the windows sent waves of fear through me. I tried to rationalize it, but I knew better now. This wasn't just paranoia. This was something else, something that I didn't understand, but I was about to learn. The next morning came slowly, and with it, an eerie quiet that blanketed the entire area. I ventured outside briefly, hoping to find some sign that the man, or whatever he was, had left. The snow was untouched. No tracks. Nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I knew I couldn't just sit inside the cabin forever. My phone had no signal, and there was no way I'd survive out there on foot for long if I didn't get help. I needed to find the nearest town, to get away from this place before whatever was watching me came for me. But as I made my way to the truck, something caught my eye, movement from the corner of the cabin. I froze. The man was there again. Not the one from last night, the other one. The one who had stood motionless in the woods, staring at me through the windows. He was closer now, just a few yards away, crouched low and hunched, his dark eyes glinting in the weak daylight. I didn't move. I wasn't sure if he saw me, or if he even cared. His gaze never wavered from the cabin, but there was something about the way he was positioned, something off, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Then, I heard it. A voice. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, like the wind carrying words. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was definitely speaking to me. My pulse quickened, and my legs froze in place. The man didn't react to the voice. He just kept staring, his head cocked to one side like a predator studying its prey. The voice grew louder, clearer, until it wasn't just the wind anymore. It was distinct, low, and hollow. "Come closer." I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for a moment. Then, just as quickly as it started, the voice faded. The man stood up, stretching his back with a slow, deliberate motion, his eyes never leaving mine. Without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his footsteps sinking into the snow without leaving a trace. I didn't know what to do. I made it back inside the cabin, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, but the terror wouldn't leave me. The voice, it wasn't human. It couldn't be. And the man, whoever he was, had been waiting for me to hear it. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived, maybe the isolation was making me hear things. But no. I knew what I'd heard, and I knew what I had seen. I needed to leave. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the truck, praying the engine would start. The truck roared to life, and I pulled out of the driveway with a sharp turn, heading down the winding road that would take me back to town. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. But when I glanced ahead, I saw it, the same dark shape that had been watching me, standing at the edge of the trees, watching as I drove away. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the truck's tires crunching over the snow as I sped down the road. The world outside blurred, the trees passing in a whirlwind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me. As I reached the end of the road and the small town came into view, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was safe. But when I pulled into the gas station to fuel up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A truck. The same one I'd seen parked outside the cabin. It was parked near the pump, covered in snow, but the engine was still running. And in the driver's seat, no one was there. I stared at the truck for a long moment, my breath freezing in the air. My skin prickled with a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then, from behind me, I heard it. A voice. The same whisper from the woods. "You're not alone." I spun around, but there was no one there. The town was empty. The gas station, silent. But the truck, it hadn't moved. The fear I had been running from was no longer a distant thing, it was here. And it wasn't going anywhere. I tried to ignore the voice, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the stress, the isolation, or the lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew. Whatever I had stumbled into out there in the woods, whatever was hunting me, it was real. I quickly finished fueling my truck and sped away from the gas station, desperate to put as much distance between myself and the town as possible. But as I drove, the feeling of being watched never left me. My eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see the truck from the cabin tailing me. But every time, the road behind me was empty. The drive back to the cabin was a blur of fear and adrenaline, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed, of something dark and menacing just beyond the trees. The landscape was so wild and barren, so unforgiving, that I couldn't imagine how I had ever thought I would be safe here. The wilderness was a predator, and I was its prey. When I finally reached the cabin, I didn't park in the driveway. I pulled off to the side of the road and shut off the engine, sitting in the dark, staring at the cabin. My mind raced. I could leave. I could drive straight to the nearest airport, fly out of Alaska, and never look back. But something held me there. Something I couldn't explain. I got out of the truck and approached the cabin slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I had locked every door before I left, but now that I was back, I couldn't help but feel like something had changed. Like the cabin had become something else entirely, a place of twisted memories and hidden horrors. I reached the door and slowly turned the handle. It creaked open, and I stepped inside, the familiar smell of wood and dust greeting me. Everything looked the same, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear the wind howling outside, but it sounded different now, more menacing, as though it was warning me. I locked the door behind me, then checked the windows. All secure. But as I turned to head back to the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The curtains in the window weren't drawn all the way. There was a gap, just enough for me to see outside. But it wasn't the wilderness that caught my eye. It was a figure standing in the trees, motionless. Watching. I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the window, pulled the curtains shut, and backed away. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. I was trapped. A noise came from the back of the cabin. A scratching. Soft, deliberate. It sounded like something, or someone, was clawing at the walls. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the cabin itself was holding me hostage. I could feel the presence, closer now, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just outside. It was inside too. The scratching stopped. And then the whispering began again. It wasn't the same hollow voice this time. It was closer, clearer. Like it was right behind me, in my ear. Come, closer. I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the doorway leading to the kitchen, stood the figure of a man. The same man who had been watching me in the woods, his eyes hollow, his skin stretched thin and sickly. His lips curled into a grotesque grin, the kind that made your stomach twist. "You shouldn't have stayed," he rasped, his voice deep and guttural, like something not meant for human ears. "It's too late for you now." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my mouth. The man took a step forward. Then another. I bolted for the door, but when I reached for the handle, I froze. The door, the one I had locked tight only moments ago, was wide open. Panic flooded my body as I turned back to face him. He was closer now, so close I could see the sickly pale skin around his neck, the veins that bulged beneath his flesh like they were about to burst. His hand reached out, and I screamed as his fingers closed around my wrist, icy cold. Then, the darkness swallowed me whole. I don't remember much of what happened next. When I woke up, I was outside, lying on the snow-covered ground next to the truck. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale light over the landscape. My body ached, my head felt like it was splitting in two, and my thoughts were fuzzy, as if I had just awoken from a long nightmare. I stumbled to my feet and looked around. The cabin was gone. In its place, there was nothing but a patch of barren ground, the outline of the building barely visible beneath the snow. The woods stood silent and still, the trees towering over me like sentinels. I ran to the truck, almost tripping over the snow in my haste. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled with the keys. The truck started with a loud roar, and I sped away, my mind too scrambled to focus on anything other than getting out. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me nearly crash the truck. A figure. Standing at the edge of the woods. Watching. The same eyes. The same twisted grin. And as I drove away, I realized something. It wasn't just the cabin that had disappeared. It was me. The road blurred in front of me as I drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles were white. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again, but the sensation of being hunted, of something following me, never left. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, pressing down, suffocating me. The wilderness had marked me, and no matter how far I went, it would never let me go. The truck's headlights barely cut through the dark, the sky above thick with clouds. I didn't know where I was going anymore, didn't care. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, the fear clung to me, relentless. I passed through another small town, barely noticing the faded lights or the few scattered buildings. My mind was too numb to take in anything else. I wasn't sure how long I'd been driving. Hours? Days? It felt like time had stopped altogether. I could still feel it, the presence. The thing that had been stalking me, pulling me toward it. And that thought, that realization, hit me with terrifying clarity. It had never been the cabin. The woods. The man. It wasn't a place or a person I had encountered. It was something else, something older, something that had always been there, just waiting. The wilderness wasn't just wild. It was alive. And it had claimed me, marked me, like an animal marking its prey. Suddenly, the truck lurched. The engine sputtered and died. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, cursing under my breath. The truck rolled to a stop, and for the first time since I had left the cabin, I allowed myself a moment of silence. Then, I heard it. The faintest of whispers, carried by the wind. You can't run. I froze. The voice, it was inside my head now, slithering in the dark corners of my mind. I opened the door, stepping out into the snow-covered road. The cold bit into my skin, but I couldn't feel it anymore. All I could feel was the gnawing, oppressive weight of something watching me, waiting for me to accept it. To surrender. And then, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees again. It wasn't the man. This was something else. Something larger, more distorted. Its outline flickered in and out of existence like a shadow that didn't belong. Its eyes were the same deep, endless void I had seen before, but now they followed me. I tried to turn back toward the truck, to run, to escape. But my feet wouldn't move. I could feel my body growing heavier, as if the very air was thickening around me, pulling me down. You belong to us now, the voice whispered again, louder this time. There is no escape. Panic surged in my chest as the figure began to move toward me. It was slow, deliberate, dragging itself forward like it had all the time in the world. But the distance between us closed quickly, too quickly. I screamed, desperate to move, but my body betrayed me. My legs trembled, and my heart pounded, the sound filling my ears, drowning out everything else. It was here. It reached out, its hands long and twisted, its fingers like skeletal branches, and just as it touched me, just as I felt the ice-cold, otherworldly grip seize me, everything went black. I woke up again, but this time, there was no snow. No truck. No road. I was in the woods. I knew immediately where I was. The cabin. The trees. The dark, suffocating quiet. The cold was biting, but I couldn't feel it. I was numb. And as I stood up, I realized I wasn't alone. The figure was standing there, the thing that had been chasing me, now closer than ever. Its eyes, dark, endless pits, were fixed on me, and I could feel its gaze crawl under my skin, into my bones. You're home, it whispered, its voice a sickening caress that made my stomach churn. I opened my mouth to scream, to run, but no sound came. There was nothing left